You could hear a pin drop in room 214 right after the sound of Ms. Whitaker's voice, sharp and slicing through the air like a blade. Derek, get out. Now. No reason. No explanation. Just the same cold command she'd used 3 times this month, each time directed at the same student. The fluorescent lights hummed above, their buzz almost mocking. Derek stood frozen beside his desk, his hands tightening around the straps of his faded black backpack. The bag was too old for a high school junior, but it was the only one he had. His jaw worked, like he was chewing over words he wasn't sure would survive the trip from his throat to his lips. You heard me, Ms. Whitaker snapped, stepping forward. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, every strand in place, as if the world itself would fall apart if one went astray. Her neatly pressed blouse and pencil skirt gave her an air of precision-off authority that tolerated no questions. But Derek had questions. He'd always had questions. Like why she always called on him last. Why his grades kept slipping no matter how hard he worked. Why his skin seemed to be the only thing she noticed about him. In the back, a pair of students exchanged uneasy glances. Carlos, his best friend, sat halfway turned in his seat, torn between standing up for Derek or staying quiet to avoid becoming the next target. Phones were discreetly lifted, cameras catching the tension because in this school, sometimes the only proof you had was the kind you could record. Miss, I didn't even say anything, Derek said, voice low but steady. You don't have to. Your attitude speaks for you, she replied, crossing her arms. There it was. The invisible offense. The kind you couldn't defend against because it wasn't about actions, it was about existence. Derek's chest rose and fell faster. Every fiber in him screamed to fight back, to say something that would make her see him not just his skin, but he'd learned the hard way that defiance came with consequences. Still, today felt different. Today, there was something in the air. Ms. Whitaker stepped toward the door, holding it open like a grim invitation. Out, before I have security escort you. His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on the old clock above the whiteboard. It was just past 10 a.m., but for Derek, the day already felt like a lifetime. He slung the backpack over his shoulder, every movement slow, deliberate. The scrape of his chair echoed in the silence as he stood. His footsteps toward the door felt like walking through thick water, heavy, suffocating. And then, as his sneakers crossed the threshold, something unexpected happened. The door opened from the other side. The figure that stepped in made every head turn. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark skin that gleamed under the harsh lighting. A face people in this city recognized instantly, even if they'd only seen it on TV or in campaign posters. Mayor Jonathan Brooks. He didn't look at Derek first. His eyes sharp, calm, and utterly unreadable went straight to Ms. Whitaker. The room seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Mayor, she started, her tone suddenly soft, almost sweet. But he didn't answer her. Instead, with the quiet precision of someone performing a sacred ritual, he stepped toward the wall beside the whiteboard where a small, shiny brass nameplate read, Ms. Elaine Whitaker, History Department. The mayor reached out, his fingers wrapping around the edges of the plate. The sound of metal sliding free from the screws was louder than it should have been. A slow, deliberate removal. No words. The nameplate came off, and he simply held it in his hand, turning to face the class. Derek could feel his heartbeat in his ears. The air was electric, charged with the weight of something about to shift. Mayor Brooks finally spoke, his voice deep and even, carrying to every corner of the room. I believe this student was in the middle of a lesson. Let's not keep him waiting. For a moment, no one moved. It wasn't just that the mayor had appeared in their classroom unannounced. It wasn't even the fact that he had removed a teacher's nameplate like it was a verdict. It was the silence in his voice, the way his calm carried more weight than shouting ever could. Derek stood in the doorway, caught between leaving and stepping back in. His instincts told him to get out while he could, but his gut told him this was something he couldn't walk away from. Ms. Whitaker's cheeks flushed a pale, blotchy pink. She straightened her blouse, forcing a tight smile. Mr. Mayor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This student. Mayor Brooks raised one hand, and it was enough to stop her mid-sentence. I'm here because I received a call from 3 different parents and 2 teachers, he said slowly, his gaze sweeping the class. About the same student. The same incidents. The same pattern. The word pattern hung heavy. Derek felt every pair of eyes flicker between him and Ms. Whitaker. His throat tightened. Pattern? That was the same word she'd used when she told the principal he was consistently disruptive. The same word the counselor used when she said he had a history of confrontation. It was never about specifics, it was about stacking vague impressions until they felt like truth. Ms. Whitaker let out a light laugh, the kind people used when they were trying to defuse something without actually addressing it. Well, I'm sure you know how teenagers can be. Especially, she caught herself, but it was too late. The mayor's eyes narrowed just slightly. Especially, her lips pressed into a thin line. Especially in a large public school, she said, adjusting. He didn't push her on it. Not yet. Instead, he turned to Derek. Son, do you want to tell me what happened? The classroom seemed to shrink. Derek's mouth went dry. He'd told this story Beferito, the vice principal, to the counselor, even to his mom, but saying it here, in front of everyone, with the mayor watching, that was different. She told me to leave. I didn't do anything, Derek said, his voice quiet but steady. I was just sitting there listening. She's been doing this for a while. Picking on me. Marking my work late when I turn it in on time. Calling me aggressive when I ask a question. I'm not aggressive. I just want to know the answers. A low murmur rippled through the students. Carlos leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell him about the essay. Derek swallowed hard. I wrote an essay last month. On Frederick Douglass. She gave me a D, said it wasn't relevant to the assignment. The assignment was an important figure in American history. The mayor tilted his head, as if he was filing away every detail. Ms. Whitaker shifted in place, her voice rising in defensiveness. It wasn't about race. It was about following directions. The student didn't meet the criteria. You mean the criteria you change after the fact? Carlos spoke up now, his voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with each word. You told us we could pick anyone. You didn't say they had to be someone you approved of. Carlos, Ms. Whitaker's voice was sharp, but the mayor's presence kept her from going full force. The mayor's eyes swept over the class again. Anyone else? And then it happened, one voice, then two, then half a dozen. Students began speaking over each other, telling their own moments, their own little snapshots of times they'd seen Derek singled out. She told him his hoodie was gang-related. She marked him absent when he was in class. She told him not to get loud when he was just answering a question. Every story added weight. Every detail painted the same picture. Ms. Whitaker's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her papers. This is an ambush. You can't just come in here and... The mayor finally spoke again, his voice low, almost conversational, but there was steel under it. Ms. Whitaker, I've spent my life in this city. I've walked these hallways as a student. I've sat in these desks. And I've seen how small decisions show little moments add up to futures built or destroyed. The room was dead still. This isn't just about a misunderstanding, he continued. This is about what kind of city we are. What kind of people we are when no one's watching. And today, people are watching. Phones were still out. Cameras still rolling. Derek's heart thudded so hard, he could feel it in his fingertips. Part of him wanted to vanish. Another part wanted to stand taller than he ever had. The mayor turned to him. Go take your seat, son. The words hit Derek like a sudden change in wind direction. He stepped back into the classroom, the sound of his sneakers against the linoleum impossibly loud in the silence. Ms. Whitaker's face tightened, but she said nothing. As Derek slid into his chair, the mayor placed the nameplate on the teacher's desk, not back in its place on the wall, but flat on the surface, like an object no longer claiming authority. I'll be speaking with the school board this afternoon, the mayor said, addressing the room, but looking directly at Ms. Whitaker. And I expect full cooperation. Ms. Whitaker opened her mouth, but the mayor was already turning toward the door. He paused only long enough to glance at the students. You all deserve better than this, he said simply. And then he was gone. The door closed with a click. No one spoke for a long time. The tension didn't vanish, it just shifted, settling over them in a new, strange way. Derek stared at the brass nameplate, its shiny surface catching the light. For the first time in months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, someone in power had seen him. But he also knew this wasn't the end. It was just the opening move. The next day, the video was everywhere. On TikTok, on Instagram, even on the local news, spliced between footage of the mayor's press conference and stock images of the school. White teacher expels black student, city mayor steps in. Some of the headlines called it a bold act of justice. Others accused the mayor of political grandstanding. The comment sections were a war zone: praise and outrage, solidarity and vitriol, all tangled together. Derek avoided reading most of it. He'd learned that looking too closely at people's opinions was like staring at the suignode, just end up burned. Still, he couldn't avoid the changes at school. Teachers gave him a little more space now, like they were afraid of ending up in the next viral clip. Students whispered when he walked by. Some slapped him on the back and called him the kid who made the mayor show up. And Ms. Whitaker? She was still there, but she didn't look at him the same way anymore. The cold certainty in her eyes had been replaced by something else, something harder to read. That afternoon, the principal called Derek into his office. His mom was already there, sitting in a chair with her arms crossed. She looked both proud and worried. "Derek," the principal began, "we've had a lot of attention on our school in the last 24 hours. And while we're taking the matter seriously, we also need to think about the long-term well-being of our students. All of them." Derek felt the trap in the words before the sentence even finished. "You mean you want me to drop it?" The principal spread his hands. "I'm saying that sometimes the best resolution isn't the loudest one." His mom cut in. "My son doesn't need to be silent to make you comfortable." The principal's mouth tightened. "We will be reviewing Ms. Whitaker's conduct, but we also have to follow due process." Derek had heard that phrase before. Due process was what people said when they wanted time for things to blow over. When they left the office, his mom put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't let them scare you into disappearing," she said. "You hear me?" He nodded. But deep down, he wondered how long could he keep standing up without getting crushed? That night, Derek sat on his bed, scrolling without really reading. The glow of his phone lit up the darkened room, his backpack still lying where he'd tossed it by the door. His mom was in the kitchen, the smell of chicken and rice drifting down the hall, but Derek's mind was somewhere else entirely. Every clip of the mayor in his classroom was the same. Him standing tall, silent, pulling the nameplate from the wall. But each account told a different story. Some saw it as a reckoning. Others saw it as an overreach. A few made it ugly, twisting the moment into something it wasn't. He clicked one video that had already racked up over 300,000 views. The caption read, "When the mayor has to come babysit your history teacher clown face." The comments were a mixed bag. "This is legendary. Why is this even a thing?" "Teacher probably had a reason." "Of course the race card comes out," face with rolling eyes. Derek tossed the phone aside and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He hated that phrase, the race card. As if race was just a game, a trick you could pull out whenever you needed an excuse. People didn't get that you couldn't just stop being black when it was inconvenient. His mom's voice cut through the thoughts. "Dinner's ready." He slid into the kitchen where his mom was plating food. She looked tired, but her eyes softened when she saw him. "How's my boy?" she asked, sliding a plate in front of him. "I'm fine." It was a lie. "You're thinking about school tomorrow." He shrugged. "Everyone's going to be staring." Again. She sat across from him. Let them see you. You didn't do anything wrong, Derek." He poked at the rice with his fork. "Yeah, but it's not over. She's still there. She's going to find another way to." "She won't," his mom cut in. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of steel underneath. "Not after this. And if she tries, she's not just dealing with you anymore." Derek met her eyes. For a moment, he believed her. The next morning, the school felt different. The halls buzzed with an energy that was part gossip, part curiosity. Derek could feel eyes on him with every step. Some were supportive nods, whispered, "Good job," as he passed, but others were colder, narrowed, watching. By second period, it was clear the tension wasn't going anywhere. Ms. Whitaker was back at her desk in history class, but the brass nameplate was gone. In its place was a blank patch of wall, the screws still poking out. She didn't greet the class, just opened her textbook and started writing dates on the board. When Derek walked in, her gaze flicked to him for half a second, no words, no expression, then back to the board. It was almost worse than open hostility. This freezing out. Midway through the lesson, a voice came from the back. "Hey, Derek," Carlos called softly. "What year did Douglas publish his autobiography?" Derek answered without looking up from his notes. 1845. Ms. Whitaker turned, marker still in her hand. "Derek, I didn't call on you." A ripple of quiet disbelief went through the class. Carlos frowned. "I asked him. He was just answering me." Her lips tightened. No side conversations. Derek forced himself to breathe slowly. This was exactly how it started every time: small, seemingly harmless corrections that piled up until they became something bigger. This time, though, he didn't drop his eyes. "I wasn't talking over you," he said evenly. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked. Hers was cool, calculating. Then she turned back to the board without another word. By lunch, the story had taken a new turn. A group of seniors were at the corner table, talking about how a local parent association was demanding the mayor stay out of school business. "They're saying it's political," one girl said, scrolling through her phone. "Like he's only doing it for attention." "That's BS," Carlos said, shaking his head. He didn't even say much. He just made it clear. Derek sat down with his tray, feeling the weight of it all pressing harder. "Yeah, but if they make it about politics, no one's going to care about what actually happened." Carlos leaned forward. "Then we don't let them. You saw how many people were talking yesterday. If we speak up, if we keep the story straight, they can't just twist it." Derek gave a humorless laugh. "You've never seen the internet, have you?" Still, the idea lingered. That night, Derek got a DM from an account he didn't recognize. The profile picture was the city skyline at sunset, no name. "We saw what happened in your class. We've been dealing with Whitaker for years. You're not the first. Want to talk?" He stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Who's we?" "Parents. Former students. People who've been shut down." Derek hesitated, then replied, "Yeah, I want to talk." Within an hour, he was on a video call with 3 people: 2 adults, 1 college student, each with their own story. Being marked absent when present. Getting detentions for things other students got warnings for. Essays downgraded for tone. It was a pattern, all right. One that went back years. "You're the first one to have someone with the mayor's kind of influence step in," the college student said. "That's why it matters this time. They can't ignore it." Derek didn't sleep much after that. 2 days later, the mayor called a public meeting at City Hall. Students, parents, teachers, anyone could speak. The council chamber was packed. Derek sat near the front with his mom and Carlos. Cameras lined the back wall. When it was his turn to speak, his legs felt like they were made of stone. He walked to the podium, the mic adjusting with a small squeak. "My name's Derek Owens," he began, voice tight. "I'm a junior at Westwood High, and I'm here because what happened to me in that classroom didn't just happen once. It's been happening, over and over, for years, not just to me." He glanced at Ms. Whitaker, who was sitting stiffly 2 rows back, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been called aggressive for asking questions. I've been told my clothes were gang-related when they weren't. I've had my work graded lower than it deserved. And when I spoke up, I was told I was overreacting. I'm not overreacting. I'm telling you the truth." He could hear murmurs in the crowd, but he kept going. "This isn't about one teacher. It's about a system that lets this happen and calls it misunderstanding. It's about how people see kids like me before they even know us. And if you're tired of hearing about it, trust me, I'm tired of living it." When he stepped back from the podium, the applause was loud and long. Even some council members were clapping. The mayor stood next, his voice steady as he announced the formation of a review committee, independent of the school board, to investigate discrimination cases. It wasn't a fix. Not yet. But it was a start. Back at school the next day, Ms. Whitaker's desk was empty. A substitute sat in her place, explaining she'd be on leave while the review was underway. Derek didn't cheer, didn't fist pump. He just sat down and opened his notebook. For the first time all year, the room felt lighter. Still, he knew this wasn't about one empty desk. It was about making sure no one else ended up standing in a doorway with the whole world telling them to leave. And that fight wasn't over. 3 weeks later, the investigation wrapped. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. Westwood High teacher resigns following racial bias review. It was in every paper, on every local news site. The official statement was short: a mess. Whitaker had chosen to resign in the best interest of the students and community. There were no apologies, no admissions, just a clean break. Derek wasn't sure how to feel. Part of him wanted to celebrate finally. Someone had been held accountable. But another part knew it didn't erase the months, the years of being made to feel smaller. It didn't fix the harm already done to others who'd gone through the same. Still, there was something undeniably different about walking into history class that day. The wall where her nameplate had been was bare, freshly painted over. The substitute smiled when he came in, greeted him like any other student. No one flinched when he raised his hand to answer a question. The mayor reached out to Derek a few days later, inviting him to City Hall. When Derek and his mom arrived, they were led into the mayor's office, a warm space filled with books, framed photos of community events, and the faint scent of fresh coffee. Mayor Brooks stood from behind his desk and shook Derek's hand firmly. "You've handled yourself with more dignity than a lot of adults I've met," he said. Derek shrugged, unsure how to respond. "I just told the truth." "That's not just anything," the mayor replied. "It's the hardest thing to do when the world's telling you to be quiet." He reached into a drawer and pulled something out. It was the nameplate, the same brass one he'd taken from the wall. "I thought about throwing it away," he said. "But then I thought it's not just a reminder of what went wrong. It's a reminder of what you stood up to. Maybe you should decide what happens to it." Derek stared at it for a long moment. The metal caught the light, the engraved letters sharp and permanent. "I don't want it," he said finally, "but I know where it should go." That Friday, Derek stood in the school library at the front of a small gathering, students, teachers, and even a few parents. On the table beside him sat the nameplate, next to a new display about civil rights leaders. "This," he said, resting a hand on the metal, "isn't here to honor anyone. It's here to remind us that history isn't just in the past. It's happening in these hallways, in these classrooms, every day, and we get to decide what side we're on." He placed the nameplate into the display case, under a card that read, "Removed from Room 214, Westwood High School, April 2025, a symbol of change." There was a murmur of approval, a few claps. But more importantly, there was a stillness, a sense that people understood. In the weeks that followed, Derek found himself speaking at more events. A community youth group asked him to talk about standing up to discrimination. A local paper ran an op-ed he wrote about the difference between punishment and real change. He was still just a high school junior, still had homework and late-night gaming sessions with Carlos, still got annoyed when the cafeteria ran out of fries. But there was a quiet shift in how he saw himself. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was choosing. One warm May afternoon, Derek walked past room 214 on his way to lunch. The door was propped open, sunlight spilling across the empty desks. He paused in the doorway, remembering the day everything had changed: the sharpness of Ms. Whitaker's voice, the weight of the mayor's presence, the click of the nameplate coming off the wall. Now, the room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. A new teacher's posters lined the walls, quotes from Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and Maya Angelou. Derek smiled to himself and kept walking. The story didn't disappear from the public conversation. Every so often, a new article would surface, or someone at the grocery store would stop his mom to say they'd seen the video. Some comments were still ugly, still dismissive. But Derek had learned something important: those voices didn't get to define the truth. Because the truth was, he hadn't been alone. Not then, not now. And the next time someone tried to push another student out of a doorway, maybe, just maybe, there'd be a whole room of people ready to stand in their way. On the last day of school, Carlos found Derek by the bleachers. "You know, you're, like, officially a local legend now, right?" Derek laughed. "Legends are supposed to be old." "Yeah, but they all start somewhere." "And you?" "You started in room 214. Derek looked out over the empty field, the summer sun dipping low. "Nah," he said after a moment. "I started the day I stopped letting them tell my story for me." That night, as the city skyline glowed under the deep blue of twilight, Derek walked past City Hall. In the lobby, a new plaque caught his eye. "In recognition of students who speak truth to power." He smiled, not because his name was on it, it wasn't, but because it didn't have to be. Some things you do for the record. Some things you do so the next kid doesn't have to. And sometimes, the quietest acts, like taking a name off a wall, echo the loudest. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.